Nice to see you today. Thank you for joining for this conversation. How are you doing?
Good. No, it's good to be able to chat with you. It's great.
I'm very grateful you're here. You and I have known each other for a little while. I remember many things that you have taught me, but maybe to begin, you can introduce yourself and where you work and what you do.
Yeah, I'm Doug Densmore. I'm a professor in electrical and computer engineering at Boston University, but I touch on a lot of different departments. So I'm also involved in something called bioinformatics. I'm also involved in molecular cell biology and biochemistry, biomedical engineering, and computer science. So I kind of bridge a lot of different fields, but it's really about how to bring computing into biology. And I've been at Boston University since 2010, so almost about 12 years. It's been a long, goes by quick.
It sure goes by quick. Yeah, and we've known each other probably from the get-go. But anyway,
Yeah.
You do such interesting work, and that notion of bringing computers into biology is so relevant and so powerful. So you have students. What kind of students do you have there?
So I have different types of students. So some students are students that are undergraduate students. So students that are getting their 4-year degree at Boston University. And those students are taking their classes. And then they sometimes want to do a little research or learn a little bit more. So they join my group and they're able to do some little projects on the side. So I have some undergraduate students. But most of my students are graduate students. So these are students that are working on their master's degree or their PhD. And I have about 8 of those students, and they are all getting degrees in different places. So some are getting a degree in electrical engineering, some are getting a degree in biomedical engineering or bioinformatics. And then I have some people who've already got their PhD and they want to stay around later, and they're called postdoctoral fellows, and they're working as well. So I've got a diverse set of folks, people from all around the world, in different backgrounds working on computing and biology.
Wow. How do you keep them all as a group working together? They're all working on such different things and at different stages of their academic careers.
Well, a lot of what we try to do in my group is take your idea of what you want to make biology do and get it all the way to actually be in the world. And so to do that, we need people at the front end making software and computing, and then other people automating robotics and things in the lab, and other people testing it. So the people all fall into different steps. So the people that do computing are usually up front, helping with the computer programs. And then the people at the end that are making things actually in the laboratory are probably more biology based. So they all kind of fall in a different role in what they do. And then my job is to try to make the whole story compelling and something interesting.
Wow. So I won't ask you for your favorite project because that would be unfair, but do you have an example of a project that has that whole life cycle or something that you've been just working on for a while that's gone through different stages?
Well, probably the thing that I'm most known for is probably one of my favorites, and that's a program that was called Cello. It stands for cell logic. Like a cello is like the woodwind, but the string instrument, but also cello, like cell logic. And the idea is you sit down at a computer and you write a program in the same language that I would have written a program to make a microprocessor. And it looks like if I sent some signal in the environment, or I see this toxin, then make this protein. So you're saying if, then, else. And that gets turned into a series of DNA pieces that then we can then send out of the computer and assemble in a variety of different ways, and it actually matched the program. And we showed that worked pretty well. And the reason that's my favorite project is a lot of students see that and they're like, that's really cool. That must have taken that past year was really busy. I'm like, no, I was working on that since 2007 and it came out in 2016. And so it was kind of the vision that I had with another professor back when I was finishing my PhD. And it took us 9 years to kind of put the whole thing together and get it all to work. So it was a big effort, but it also was that we shared that vision. It's about what we could do, that we could start at a computer.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds almost like science fiction, right? So I'm not surprised that it took so long to go from like a statement to a DNA circuit that you can then actually build and test, right? Like it's almost like science fiction, but it's very powerful and very cool. So
Yeah.
I can see that that's a good example of all the things that you're trying to do. So,
Yeah.
well, it's clearly a collaborative group, and you're a very collaborative person, which is a key to doing things that are interdisciplinary for sure. But are you a computer scientist by training? Are you a biologist? Are you? Yeah.
That's a good. I am an engineer.
Mhm.
So people often have said I've been in scientific communities, and they say they call me a scientist, and that's not fair to scientists. I have never had a hypothesis ever. I'm not really someone who says this is a hypothesis and I go through the scientific method. I'm much more like I'm going to build something from pieces. Like I don't, so I like to put things together. I like to make physical things I can touch or I can program. So I'm an engineer. I'm a computer engineer. At the end of the day, I am someone who thinks about computing. If biology didn't compute, I probably would not be interested in it. But biology is making decisions and sensing and communicating. So it's a big computer, but we just don't think of it like that. So I'm a computer engineer, an engineer. And for the students watching this, my goal when I went to the University of Michigan for undergrad. I'm from Michigan. I'm outside a little city called Kalamazoo, Michigan. And when I was a kid, I loved the Nintendo. I grew up in the 80s, and I said I wanted to work at Nintendo. And at some point, when I was working at Michigan, I realized I didn't really like programming as much as I liked making computer hardware. So I liked making chips. And then I ended up working at Intel and doing other things. And at some point, somebody said that same hardware, we are trying to make hardware like that in DNA. We're making these logic gates. And so I just always have liked the substrate, the actual mechanism by which computation happens. And now instead of silicon, it's DNA. So I'm still someone who just tries to take those principles and put them in DNA. But I always like video games, and it came out of that wanting to do that. But I realized two things. I always tell students like, why didn't you do video games? I wanted to work at Nintendo. First of all, my Japanese is non-existent. So really becoming immersed in a Japanese culture-based company would have been tough for me. And also, I'm not a particularly good artist. And being like doing a lot of video game work is almost an artistic, and it's almost as artistic as it is technical. Yeah. So making computer hardware was better for me. So
wow. Well, Nintendo's loss is clearly biological engineering's gain. So lucky us that you have jumped ship. And yeah, what a great example for how many different parts of your brain you really do need to draw on to be, in these interdisciplinary fields. And it is a creative endeavor, and you do need, communication and all. Very, very interesting. So no regrets about not going into computer gaming and Nintendo, it sounds like. So, and then from Michigan, you graduated with an electrical engineering degree, you said?
A computer engineering degree. And then what I had done is I had been fortunate to work at Intel as an intern. And what I realized, I didn't really like working at a large company, or at least I didn't like working in a large company that had so many junior engineers. I wanted to work for maybe a smaller company or be a senior engineer. So in order to be a designer, I wanted to be a computer architect. In order to do that, I need to go get some advanced degree. And so then I had already worked at Intel in California. So I said, I'll go to Berkeley. I was fortunate to get into Berkeley. I said, I'll go there, and all my friends are already out in Northern California. But when I did that, you could either get into Berkeley grad school in computer science or electrical engineering. There was no computer engineering, and computer science required something called the computer science GRE, which is extremely hard if your background, it's very diverse. I didn't have the background to take it because I had taken more engineering, less computer science. So I said, I'll just be an electrical engineer at Berkeley. And so I ended up being in the electrical engineering department. And
isn't it funny how some of these decisions get made, right? You're like, well, I don't want to take that test, so I'm going to go in that direction instead. So I think there have been worse reasons that people have made career choices. So I think it's perfectly sensible. So very, very interesting. So now it's funny because I had thought, and one of my memories, well, I have a lot of memories of working with you, but one of the memories I have is a talk you gave where you were talking about math and how math has rules and you can apply those rules all the time. 2 + 2 is 4, right? And biology has themes, but not a simple rule like 2 + 2 is 4, that you'd have to remember pieces of biology, that you couldn't have a rule that you could then apply to multiple pieces of biology. So I think I've not done justice to that idea, but I thought math played a bigger role in your background.
Well, so it does more than most people. So what I say often is I'm not very good at math, but I have a PhD in electrical engineering. So I've probably taken a lot more math, and my PhD was in something called formal verification. So what you would do is you made a model of a system that was a mathematical model, and then you'd say, that's what I want the system to do. Then you'd make the system, and you would check, does that system match what you said it should do? Like if I made a model of a car, I could extract what should happen when I push the brakes. Then I'd push the brakes and say that doesn't really happen.
Yeah.
So I had math in that,
Yeah.
but I'm not the most mathematical electrical engineer. There's people who more. So what I was talking a little bit maybe with biology, I'm guessing was that there's probably isn't. I imagine there's math. Like if I wanted to simulate my body and everything, like on some level, that is a bunch of math going on, but it's extremely hard to model all of that and compute it, and it's probably inaccurate, and you're making lots of assumptions. And so what I was likely saying is, instead of trying to have this rigorous mathematical piece, I suggest often with biology is that we have these heuristics and rules for how we compose parts, and then we just make lots of them, and then we can make them, because making biology is relatively cheap. I can't make tons of chips. Microprocessors cost more to make than the actual making biology. So I can make lots of samples. So I kind of what I propose often is less of a rigorous mathematical modeling approach and more of a heuristic design, build, and screening method.
That makes a ton of sense. It really does. And I will say that it sounds an awful lot like your PhD sounds an awful lot like cello, but applied to computers, right? The idea that you're going to, figure out what you wanted to build and test that it actually is behaving the way you want it to behave it. So
I was in the lab. There's a part of computer, like when the people who make computer chips are called computer architects, and they sit down and say, these blocks go here and these circuit blocks go here. Part of the circuit is actually doesn't do anything. It just tests the other blocks. Because once you get it back, how are you going to test that the chip works?
Right.
So there are parts that test it. So it's kind of the nerdiest part of computer architecture, because it's not exciting. It's like, I make the test blocks. And I worked in something that it was called design for test. And I really liked that because it was a really kind of internal part. And then the design automation was, how do we actually get this to physically be manufactured? So I was in a very niche area. And what I liked about synthetic biology instantly when I got involved is when I made a new tool in electronics, 5 people cared, maybe.
Yeah.
It was a relatively small, it was a very mature space. A lot of the math and algorithms were created in the 60s and 70s when computing was young. So it's hard to make advances. It was hard to make a lot of impact. But then when I started first talking at this organization called the Synthetic Biology Engineering Research Center, Synbio, where I first would have met Natalie, when I met her, I could give a talk about the idea of computers, and the whole room was interested in it. And everyone was like, no, nothing like this exists. We like your vision. Why don't you start doing it? So I just got a lot more satisfaction out of the excitement people had. And I felt like this was a really early stage computing.
Yes, I think it is.
It was a fun place to be.
Yep. I think there is a lot of opportunity for impact, as you say, in this field, and you have made a ton of it. And I remember being part of Synbio and learning so much about computers and just as a scientist, right, learning a totally different language and a different approach, and trying to find the junction where those connections could be. We have also gotten to work together through outreach and engagement. Yeah. So you have some very interesting programs like STEM Pathways. Any vision that you want to share about that and how it connects to your experiences or your work?
Yeah, so we have, as I said, I work with undergrads in this program, and I work with other students. And I wanted to find a mechanism to get them involved in synthetic biology, to get them involved in the research process, also create networks of students. So my vision is figuring out ways to really get people involved in synthetic biology that might not think about it. And that could be for a couple reasons. One, it might be students don't think, oh, I'm in computing. Biology is not for me. Or I'm a mechanical engineer. I'm not interested in biology. So one is exposing people to synthetic biology and really explaining that it's not really one thing, that lots of people can get involved. And then the other thing is finding students, because of either their gender or their ethnic background or their other pieces where they may not have seen role models, or other people who have, that might say these things aren't for me, or I don't see people like myself in these situations. So I've tried to create some things like that where we can make a big community and a family kind of organization where we can bring people together. So those are some of the things I was excited about. I grew up in a really kind of rural place in Michigan. And I was fortunate that my uncle had a thermoplastics forming company,
Wow.
and he was really an engineering guy. But I don't think if I had him around, I mean, he was like, I have a business and I'm an engineer, and he always had something smart to say. So I was fortunate that I bumped into him. I was fortunate that I bumped into a handful of other people.
Mhm.
And so I'm just trying to find places where students can bump into those folks.
Yeah.
And maybe one or two, it only takes one or two kind of engagements where the people will be like, that's the kind of person I want to be, or that's the kind of thing. So I'm just trying to create that environment.
I agree. Those, random collisions with individuals that turn out to be very influential. It's a lot of luck, and it's great to be an architect of that as well. I admire it in your work tremendously, and feel very lucky to be able to be working with you. So, yeah. Well, thank you for sharing your path and your interests and all the very cool work you're doing. I'm sure there are many students who will find this absolutely fascinating and open the perspectives that they have on what is possible, because it's an exciting time.
Oh, great. No, thank you. And likewise, thanks for all the work you do with BioBuilder and community building and synthetic biology. So I'm looking forward to working with you in the years to come.
Yeah.